Imagine being the boss of a successful jewelry empire, only to find yourself humiliated by the very employees you thought you could trust. What happens when the truth behind your own company starts to unravel? What secrets will be uncovered? And how will it change everything? Stay tuned to find out. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like, share this video, and subscribe to the channel to help us reach 1,000 subscribers. Your support means the world to us and inspires us to create even more engaging content. Thank you. Lena Maxwell, the CEO of a renowned retail chain, had always been seen as a commanding figure in the industry. With years of success, a sharp business mind, and a reputation that preceded her, she had built an empire. She was no stranger to the world of high-level board meetings and corporate power plays, where every decision she made had the potential to shape the market. But on this particular day, Lena decided to step away from her high-rise office and take a different approach to running her company. She had always prided herself on understanding her customers. The key to success, she believed, was being in touch with their experiences and needs. So, Lena disguised herself as an ordinary shopper, swapping her tailored suit for casual attire, and entered one of her company's retail stores under the guise of an average consumer. It wasn't just about doing a routine check, she wanted to feel what her customers felt. See her store through their eyes. As she walked through the aisles, picking up products and browsing, Lena couldn't help but notice the difference in how she was treated. The staff, usually so polite and attentive, barely acknowledged her. There were no welcoming smiles, no offers of assistance, nothing. She could tell that she wasn't being treated the way a regular customer would be. And certainly not the way a CEO of the company should be. Lena tried to shake it off at first, assuming it was simply an off day for the employees. But as she moved through the store, the feeling lingered. Something was wrong. She made her way to the checkout counter, where the cashier barely looked up, and the interaction was cold at best. It wasn't just a lack of enthusiasm, it felt like indifference. Like she didn't belong. This wasn't the service Lena expected at any of her stores. It was as if she had become invisible, another anonymous shopper in the sea of customers, with no recognition of who she was. The feeling stuck with her as she left the store. As she stepped out into the parking lot, Lena's mind raced. What was going on? Why was she being treated like this? The more she thought about it, the more it gnawed at her. This wasn't just about one bad experience, it was about the quality of her company's customer service. She had always trusted her team to uphold the values of the brand, to treat each customer with respect and attention. And yet here she was, standing in the middle of a corporate paradox. It wasn't just a simple mistake. It was a glaring sign that something deeper was at play. She had to find out what was going on. But the questions kept growing. Was this just one rogue employee? Or was there a systemic issue in the way her stores were being run? How many other customers had felt the same way? The more Lena thought about it, the more she realized that she couldn't ignore it. She had to find answers. She made a decision then and there. She would investigate her stores from the inside. She would dig deeper, uncover what had happened, and ensure that her customers received the service they deserved. But she knew this wasn't going to be an easy journey. And as the uncertainty weighed on her, Lena felt a sense of unease that would only grow in the days to come. Lena Maxwell's determination to uncover the truth had only grown stronger since her unsettling experience in the store. She couldn't let it slide. Something was off, and she needed to know what. So, she started digging deeper, trying to find answers that would explain the cold reception she'd received. The more she investigated, the more troubling patterns began to emerge. At first, it seemed like a simple misunderstanding. After all, in a company as large as hers, a mistake here and there was bound to happen. But as Lena scrutinized the reports on store performance and customer feedback, she found inconsistencies that didn't add up. It wasn't just bad customer service, it felt deliberate, as though something was being hidden, carefully veiled behind the numbers. One afternoon, Lena called a meeting with Sarah Mitchell, the senior manager in charge of operations. Sarah had always been competent, reliable, and someone Lena trusted. But today, Lena noticed a change in Sarah's demeanor. When asked about discrepancies in the customer feedback reports and product inventory, Sarah grew visibly uneasy. She avoided eye contact, shifting in her seat uncomfortably. When Lena pressed further, Sarah's responses became vague and defensive. "I'll need more time to gather the right data." "Lena, we're working on it," Sarah insisted, but Lena wasn't convinced. It wasn't like her to dodge questions. There was something more to it. Then, things began to unravel faster than Lena had anticipated. She started digging into the financial reports of some stores and was shocked by what she found. Not only were there inconsistencies in the inventory reports, but there were also unusual transactions showing up in the company's financials. Large sums were being spent on products that weren't even listed in the store catalogs. Products that weren't being stocked on shelves but were disappearing into thin air. Lena's stomach churned as she connected the dots. Someone was manipulating the system, covering up information, and creating false reports. She knew that the company's financial health was at risk. But this wasn't just about money, this was about integrity. If people were willing to lie on such a scale, it meant they were willing to sacrifice everything for profit. And if the wrong people found out, this could ruin everything Lena had worked for. As she delved further into the investigation, Lena started to notice something strange about Mark Johnson, a high-level executive who had been with the company for years. Mark had always been dependable, but lately, he'd been acting more withdrawn. He refused to attend some crucial meetings and seemed to avoid Lena whenever she asked for updates. When she asked him directly about the discrepancies in the reports, his face went pale. "I don't have an explanation for those, Lena. It's out of my hands," he mumbled, his voice barely above a whisper. Lena's intuition told her there was more to this than just a lack of oversight. The real twist came one morning when Lena received a call from her head of internal auditing. "Lena, I've got bad news," he said. "The files on the recent sales transactions, those we've been reviewing, are gone. They were erased from the system overnight." Her heart sank. That was the proof she needed. The evidence had just vanished, and she had no idea who was behind it. Was it Mark, Sarah, or someone else entirely? The disappearance of the files wasn't the only shock. That same day, one of her most trusted junior employees, Kate Ellis, disappeared without a trace. Lena had always relied on Kate for accurate reports and honest feedback. But now, she found herself questioning everything. Kate had been the one who first flagged the discrepancies in the inventory. She was the one who had begun to pull at the threads of the tangled web of lies. And now she was gone. The sudden absence of someone so dependable left Lena with a bitter taste in her mouth. Was Kate part of this conspiracy? Or had she been silenced? Either way, Lena couldn't ignore the gravity of the situation anymore. At this point, Lena realized the stakes were much higher than she had ever imagined. She had uncovered a deep-seated corruption within her own company. But this was just the tip of the iceberg. Her trust had been betrayed, and everything she had worked for could be destroyed if she didn't act quickly. But then came the hardest part, the decision. Lena could walk away, cut her losses, and focus on saving her reputation and career. She could let this mess slide and hope it would go away. After all, a scandal this big could ruin her company, and perhaps even her future. Or she could continue digging, exposing the truth, and risk everything. She knew the road ahead would be dangerous. And the more she thought about it, the more she realized that there was no turning back now. Lena stared at her reflection in the office window. The city below was bustling, unaware of the storm brewing inside her. For a moment, she wondered if she had the strength to fight back, if she was willing to pay the price for doing what was right. Then, with a deep breath, she made her decision. "I can't stop now," Lena whispered to herself. "The truth matters more than my career. I will bring this to light, no matter the cost." Lena Maxwell had always trusted her gut when it came to business. But the uncertainty she felt now wasn't something she could ignore. The puzzle pieces had started to come together in a way that made her question everything she had believed about the company she had built. She needed to uncover the truth, and she knew that to do so, she couldn't rely solely on reports and boardroom discussions. She had to see it for herself. So, Lena did something unexpected. She decided to infiltrate her own company, taking a step into the shadows. Disguised as a temporary employee, she swapped her tailored business suits for an ordinary uniform, blending in with the staff she managed from afar. Her intention was clear: to see firsthand what was really happening in her stores. At first, it felt strange. walking around the office and interacting with employees as if she were one of them. The usual power she held in the boardroom was replaced by the anonymity of a temporary worker. But it was this very disguise that would give her the insight she needed. Lena started by visiting different departments, speaking with staff members, and watching their actions closely. She noticed things she hadn't before, conversations that seemed a little too secretive, products being handled without proper documentation, and employees avoiding certain questions. They were subtle signs, but they added up. It was clear now that the company's operations weren't as clean as they appeared from the outside. But where was the evidence? What were they hiding? Fortunately, Lena wasn't alone in her investigation. She reached out to an internal employee, someone she trusted, Jason Williams. Jason had once been a rising star in the company, but after uncovering fraudulent activities, he was pushed to the sidelines. He had become disillusioned, and his career had taken a hit. However, despite his discontent, Jason had access to some of the most sensitive information within the company. And he was willing to help Lena. "I've seen things, Lena, things I wish I didn't," Jason admitted one afternoon, his voice low, as if someone might overhear. "I don't know how deep this goes, but I can tell you, it's not just some rogue employees. It's the system. It's built into the culture. And you're right to be suspicious." Jason handed Lena a few key documents, products that were mysteriously labeled as premium, but were being swapped with cheaper, lower quality alternatives in the back of the store. They've been replacing high-end items with knockoffs, all in the name of profit. And it's not just happening here, it's happening across the board. Lena's stomach tightened. The magnitude of the situation was greater than she had imagined. It wasn't just a few bad apples, it was a systematic operation of deception, stretching across multiple locations. But the investigation wasn't going to be easy. Lena decided to visit another branch, hoping that it might shed light on the full scope of the problem. She walked into the new location quietly, observing the interactions and the operations. It didn't take long before she noticed similar patterns. Products were being handled carelessly, and staff seemed unusually tense when it came to certain products. She slipped into the back office, where she found a hidden drawer containing a confidential document. It revealed the extent of the fraudulent dealings, contracts forged to buy cheaper goods under the guise of premium products. The evidence she needed to expose the operation was finally in her hands. But as she was gathering everything, a disturbing thought crossed her mind. Something didn't feel right. She had been so focused on the evidence, she hadn't realized how isolated she had become from those she trusted. The realization hit her when she attempted to reach out to Kate Ellis, one of her most trusted employees. Kate had been instrumental in helping her track the fraudulent transactions earlier. But now, when Lena tried to contact her, Kate didn't respond. Lena's heart sank as she called Kate's phone again, only to find it switched off. It wasn't like Kate to disappear without notice. Panic set in as she pieced together the situation. What if Kate had been threatened? What if she was no longer safe? Lena knew this wasn't just a simple business issue, it had become dangerous. As she sat in the empty office, holding the documents that could bring down the entire operation, she realized that the stakes were much higher than she had anticipated. Kate was gone, and with her disappearance, Lena's ability to fully trust anyone in her inner circle was slipping away. Someone was watching, someone knew what she was up to, and they weren't going to let her get away with it. With a heavy sigh, Lena knew that there was no turning back. This wasn't just about saving her company anymore, it was about protecting the people who had stood by her and bringing justice to those who had been wronged. The fight for the truth was far from over. Lena Maxwell had expected pushback, but nothing could have prepared her for the cold, calculating look she saw when she walked into the conference room that day. The atmosphere was thick with tension, the kind of pressure that you could almost taste. It was time to face the truth head on. No more guessing, no more waiting. It was time to confront the very people who had built this web of deceit. The moment she walked in, she was met with the stern gaze of Michael Brooks, the company's vice president of operations. He had always been sharp, an expert in corporate maneuvering, but today his expression was something far darker, defensive, yet threatening. Michael was one of the senior executives she had trusted for years. But now, it was clear that trust had been a lie. He wasn't just a part of the system, he was the system. "I'm surprised you've gotten this far, Lena," he said, his voice calm, almost too calm. "You're poking around in things you don't fully understand. You'd be wise to step back before you cause more damage than you can fix. There are consequences to stirring the pot." His words cut deeper than Lena expected. She had been warned before, of course. But hearing it from Michael, someone she had relied on for strategic decisions, made it feel personal. He wasn't just defending the company, he was defending himself. And the guilty ones always fight the hardest. Lena held his gaze, refusing to show any sign of weakness. "I'm not backing down, Michael," she replied, her voice steady but cold. "What's been happening here isn't just a misunderstanding. This is corruption, and it ends now." The rest of the meeting was a psychological battle. Michael, along with the other senior managers, tried to maintain their composure as Lena laid out the facts, tipping her hand just enough to show that she wasn't bluffing. She had the documents, the evidence, the proof that something was terribly wrong. But they, in turn, twisted and deflected, doing everything they could to confuse her and discredit her findings. They spoke in circles, offering explanations that made no sense and shifting the blame onto lower-level employees. Lena could feel the pressure mounting. The tension in the room made it feel like they were all playing a dangerous game of chess. And every move mattered. Every word she spoke could either bring her closer to exposing the truth or push her further into a corner. The walls of the room seemed to close in on her as Michael subtly reminded her of her position. She was the CEO. But she was also a woman fighting against a deep-rooted network of power and influence. How far was she really willing to go? The twist came when, during a tense pause in the conversation, Lena's eyes caught a set of documents Michael had carelessly left on the table. They weren't meant for her to see, but there they were, glaring at her. As her fingers brushed over them, a cold realization sank in. This wasn't just a few rogue employees trying to cover their tracks. This was a long-term, deliberate strategy. The documents laid out a detailed plan that Michael and several others had put into place to manipulate not just product inventories but also the company's financial systems. They were planning to falsify entire records, systematically replacing high-end products with cheaper, subpar alternatives, all while funneling the profits into hidden accounts. Lena felt a sharp stab in her chest. The very people she had trusted most were the architects of this scandal. Her mind raced as she absorbed the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just about a few dishonest people. This was a systemic rot at the very core of the company. It had been in motion for years, and Lena had only scratched the surface. What was she really up against? The investigation was no longer just about clearing her company's name, it was about survival. The battle had grown larger than she had anticipated, and now, the stakes were more personal than ever. But before Lena could gather her thoughts, disaster struck. The documents she had just discovered, those that held the evidence to destroy the entire operation, were suddenly gone. The folder, the one Michael had left behind, was now missing. She stood frozen, her pulse quickening as she realized what had just happened. Someone had taken it, someone who knew exactly what she had found. Looking for something? Michael's voice broke through the silence, laced with an edge that was impossible to ignore. Lena turned, but it was too late. She had lost the evidence, the crucial piece that could expose everything. She could feel the floor slip out from beneath her. She had been one step ahead, and now, in one swift move, she had been outplayed. Lena stood still for a moment, her mind racing. The loss of this evidence wasn't just a setback, it was a disaster. She had trusted the people in that room, and now they were going to make sure that her search for the truth came to a screeching halt. She could feel the weight of her situation pressing down on her shoulders. She had no evidence, no concrete way to prove her suspicions. She was up against a system that was prepared to do whatever it took to protect itself. But Lena wasn't one to give up. She wasn't going to let them win, not when the truth was within her reach. "Do you think this is over?" Lena asked, her voice sharper than before. "Because it's not. I will find the truth, no matter what it takes." Her determination was the only weapon she had left. But as she stood in that room, facing the people she had once trusted, Lena realized that this battle was far from over. It had only just begun. The clock on the wall ticked relentlessly, marking each passing second as Lena Maxwell sat at her desk, poring over the documents she had worked so hard to gather. She had thought she was close to exposing the truth. Close to bringing down the corruption that had taken root in her company. But just as it seemed like she was gaining ground, the storm began to gather. And it wasn't the kind of storm she had anticipated. Michael Brooks, the vice president of operations, wasn't about to go down quietly. In fact, he was about to show just how much power he still held. Even when cornered, Lena had been gathering evidence to take to the press, hoping that the public scrutiny would apply enough pressure to break the hold that the corrupt executives had on the company. But Michael had his own plans, and they were a lot bigger than Lena had realized. Michael orchestrated a large, public event that would overshadow everything Lena had been working on. It was a gala, meant to celebrate the company's record-breaking growth, but it felt more like a well-planned performance. The media buzzed with excitement as Michael took the stage, addressing the gathered crowd with the kind of charisma that had always allowed him to manipulate any situation to his advantage. He smiled for the cameras, spoke about the future of the company, and painted an image of prosperity and integrity that seemed to shine brighter than ever. Lena watched from her office, unable to shake the feeling of betrayal. The event was a distraction, a well-executed play to shift the public's attention away from the growing whispers of corruption within the company. The more she saw of Michael, the more she realized how much power he still commanded, how effortlessly he had spun the narrative to his benefit. Lena's investigation had now become a distant concern in the eyes of the public, eclipsed by the image of a company on the rise. The timing couldn't have been worse for Lena. She had been planning to hold a press conference of her own, one that would expose the corruption she had uncovered. She had hoped to turn the media's focus to the truth, to use her findings to force the company's hand. But now, with Michael's event dominating the news, her efforts felt like a drop in the ocean. The public's attention had shifted, and the momentum she had worked so hard to build was slipping away. In the middle of all this chaos, Lena turned to her closest ally in the company, Kate Ellis. Kate had been her trusted right hand, the one person who had been with her every step of the way. Someone who had always been fiercely loyal. But as the days passed, Lena began to notice something was off. Kate, who had once been so eager to help, had become distant. Her messages were short, her responses less frequent, and she seemed preoccupied. When Lena finally confronted Kate, she didn't expect what came next. "I can't keep doing this," Kate confessed, her voice shaking. "I've been getting threats, Lena. They're telling me to back off or else. I can't risk my family's safety. I'm sorry, but I can't help you anymore." The words hit Lena like a punch to the gut. Kate had promised her loyalty, but now she was backing out. The weight of it all crashed down on Lena. This wasn't just a business fight anymore. This was personal. Kate was scared. The corruption ran deeper than Lena had thought, and the consequences of exposing it were far-reaching. Lena had lost one of her most trusted allies, and it left a hole in her strategy that she didn't know how to fill. But just when Lena thought things couldn't get worse, they did. One of the key pieces of evidence she had been carefully guarding, the documents that outlined the full extent of the company's fraudulent operations, disappeared. Lena had kept them locked away, confident that her most critical lead was safe. But when she went to retrieve them, they were gone, vanished without a trace. Panic set in. Lena rushed through her office, checking every drawer, every file, but it was clear. Someone had taken them. She felt like she was being suffocated by the walls closing in around her. Her plan, her strategy, was unraveling before her eyes. It wasn't just a setback, it was a devastating blow. Without the proof, she was powerless. The corruption she had uncovered would remain hidden, and the ones responsible would continue to run unchecked. Lena sat at her desk, staring at the empty space where the documents had been. Her mind raced. Who could have done this? Michael? One of the others in the company? The betrayal stung more than she had expected, especially from people she had once trusted. The stakes had always been high, but now, with everything slipping through her fingers, it felt like she was losing more than just the battle for her company. She was losing the war. She stood up, pacing back and forth, trying to find a solution, trying to figure out what to do next. Her options were narrowing, and each decision felt heavier than the last. But one thing was clear, she couldn't give up. Not now. Not when she was so close. The fight had changed, but it wasn't over. With a deep breath, Lena sat back down. I will find another way, she muttered to herself, determination hardening her resolve. The truth will come out, no matter what it takes. Lena Maxwell sat behind her desk, staring out the window at the skyline. It had been a week since she lost the evidence. A week of sleepless nights and agonizing decisions. The pressure was unbearable, but she couldn't back down now. Not when she had come so far. The road ahead was unclear, but the path she had taken was already etched into her mind. She knew what she had to do. She had to confront Michael Brooks, the man responsible for orchestrating the corruption that had nearly consumed everything she had built. Lena had tried every other method, investigation, persuasion, even the media, but nothing had worked. Now, it was time to face him directly, to bring everything into the light, even if the odds were against her. It was no longer just about exposing him. It was about exposing the system that had allowed him and others like him to thrive unchecked for so long. Michael had always been a man of composure, of calculated moves. And he had been playing the game long before Lena even realized the stakes. But this time, she would not be intimidated. She had her back against the wall. But that made her fight harder. Lena scheduled a public meeting with the press, her lawyers, and key stakeholders to lay everything on the line. The news of the meeting spread quickly. And soon enough, the media was buzzing. The company had been under scrutiny for months. But now, the showdown was going to happen in front of the world. She knew the stakes were high, and failure wasn't an option. The day of the meeting arrived, and Lena entered the conference room with a sense of resolve she hadn't felt in days. The room was filled with journalists, lawyers, and board members. They all whispered among themselves, trying to gauge the mood of the room. But Lena stood tall, prepared to deliver the truth. The stage was set, and there was no turning back. Michael Brooks walked in moments later, his presence commanding. His usual charisma was on full display as he greeted the press. But there was something different in his eyes today. He knew this wasn't going to be an easy win for him. But he was still Michael Brooks, he still had power. And that was something Lena had to face head on. Lena, he began, as he made his way to the front of the room. I assume you've gathered everyone here to make some wild accusations. You should know, this isn't the way to handle company issues. You're causing unnecessary panic. What you're doing is not only damaging our reputation but could lead to irreversible consequences for everyone here. His words were smooth, but Lena wasn't fooled. He was trying to control the narrative, to spin this as her doing harm to the company rather than exposing the truth. But this time, it wasn't going to work. She stood up, meeting his gaze with unwavering confidence. Michael, this isn't about reputation anymore. This is about right and wrong. You've been part of a system that's been deceiving customers, manipulating financial records, and ruining people's lives, and I have the evidence to prove it. A murmur rippled through the room. Michael's smile faltered, but he quickly regained his composure. You think you have evidence? He sneered, his tone mocking. I've been in this business too long. Lena, I've seen all sorts of tactics, and none of them scare me. You're wasting everyone's time. But Lena wasn't backing down. She pressed forward, revealing what she had managed to gather, a collection of documents, emails, and recordings that painted a damning picture of Michael and his colleagues. She presented the evidence in front of the room, showing how the company had been systematically falsifying records, manipulating products, and lining their pockets at the expense of their customers. However, as she continued, Michael's demeanor shifted, his face hardened, and his voice became more clipped. You're not seeing the bigger picture here, Lena, he said, his eyes narrowing. This isn't just about us. There's a bigger organization involved. This goes beyond the company. Lena paused, her heart racing. Michael's words hung in the air, and for the first time, she felt the weight of something larger than the company itself. She had thought that exposing Michael was the key to everything. But now she realized there was more to this story, something far more dangerous. What do you mean? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady, though her mind was swirling. Michael leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. There are powerful people behind this. People who will stop at nothing to protect their interests. If you keep pushing, Lena, you won't just be fighting me. You'll be fighting a much bigger system. And that's a fight you're not ready for. A chill ran down her spine. This was no longer just about a corporate scandal. It was about power, an insidious force that stretched far beyond her reach. Just as the realization hit her, disaster struck once again, in the middle of the confrontation. As Lena was about to reveal more critical documents, one of the lawyers on her team whispered in her ear, "Lena, they've planted evidence. We've been set up." Lena turned sharply, her mind scrambling to make sense of what she was hearing. The documents she had been holding were suddenly fake. They had been altered, their authenticity compromised in a way that made them impossible to use. She had been outplayed, again. Michael smiled coldly, sensing victory. "You see, Lena, you've lost. It's over." The room seemed to close in on her as she realized the full extent of the trap she had walked into. She had no evidence. She had no way of proving what she knew to be true. The fight had escalated beyond anything she could have imagined. And now, Michael had the upper hand. But Lena's resolve was stronger than ever. She had come this far. And she wasn't going to give up now. The battle wasn't over, it had only just begun. Even if the truth was buried for now, she would find a way to expose it. She would keep fighting, no matter the cost. Lena Maxwell had fought hard to uncover the truth. But each step forward felt like one more blow. The evidence had been altered, and Michael Brooks had outmaneuvered her at every turn. She was back at square one, her reputation on the line, with nothing but a few scattered leads and the determination to keep pushing forward. But Lena wasn't ready to give up, not yet. Her mind raced, as she sifted through the few remaining pieces of evidence she had. This time, she would play the game differently. She had lost the physical proof, but she still had her wit, her allies, and an unyielding sense of justice. It was time for a counterattack, a psychological one. Lena gathered a small but trusted group of allies, including Jason Williams and Kate Ellis, both of whom had played crucial roles in her fight so far. They sat together in the dimly lit office, drawing up plans for a series of clandestine meetings. This wouldn't be a direct confrontation. This would be about subtly turning the tables, using information to plant seeds of doubt among Michael's supporters. Their first step was to meet secretly with key individuals within the company, people who had influence but might be wavering in their loyalty. Lena knew that if she could sway the right people, she could dismantle Michael's support base from the inside. She couldn't afford to let this opportunity slip through her fingers, especially with the stakes so high. The people she reached out to were mid-level managers, department heads, and even some influential investors, individuals who could make or break the company's future. These weren't just employees to Lena, they were potential chess pieces. And she needed to play her hand carefully. At these secret meetings, Lena planted the seeds of doubt. She showed them what she had discovered, the irregularities, the manipulation of company assets, the lies being told to the public. Slowly, she began to pull back the veil that Michael had worked so hard to keep in place. She didn't give them all the answers at once. Instead, she made them question everything. "How long do you think this can last?" she asked one of the managers, a person who had always appeared loyal but never fully trusted her. "Is this what you signed up for?" But the most significant part of her strategy wasn't just gathering more evidence, it was testing the loyalty of the people closest to her. As she dug deeper into the company's tangled web, she began to feel the weight of the danger closing in. Could she trust the people she was working with? Or was she surrounded by more traitors than allies? She had to be sure that everyone who was helping her was as invested in the fight for justice as she was. It was during one of these tense meetings that the twist came, a betrayal that sent a chill down Lena's spine. Jason, the man who had stood by her through every hardship, suddenly flipped the script. He had promised to support her, but the pressure had gotten to him, and his loyalty crumbled. Jason had secretly provided information to Michael. The shock was overwhelming. The man she had trusted, the one who had helped her expose the first pieces of corruption, had turned against her when the stakes became too high. "Lena, you don't understand. I had no choice," Jason said, his voice strained, as if pleading for her to understand. "They have too much power. They'll destroy everything, my family, my career. I had to protect myself." The betrayal stung deeply, and Lena's heart sank. This wasn't just a blow to her investigation, it was a personal wound. Jason's actions had not only undermined her efforts, but they had also left her vulnerable. She couldn't afford to lose any more allies. Yet, here she was, dealing with the very thing she had feared most: betrayal from someone she thought she could trust. As the pieces of her plan began to fall apart, Michael made his move. He came forward, no longer hiding behind his carefully constructed image. He made it clear that he was no longer content with subtle manipulations. "You think you can take me down, Lena?" Michael asked, his voice dripping with malice. "You've already lost, and now, you'll see just how far I can go to protect what's mine." With those words, Michael revealed the depth of his power, and the threats he was willing to make. "It's not just you I'm worried about," he said, a dark glint in his eyes. "If you continue with your investigation, you're not just jeopardizing your career, you're putting your family and everyone you love in danger. Think about what you're doing." Lena felt a cold chill sweep over her. The stakes were no longer just about corporate corruption. Michael had crossed a line. He wasn't just after her company, he was threatening everything she held dear. He was using her vulnerability, her love for her family, to try and make her back down. It wasn't enough to destroy her career, he wanted to break her completely. The weight of his words lingered in her mind, but Lena's resolve did not waver. She had come too far. And now, the fight wasn't just about exposing Michael, it was about protecting her family, her future, and the values she had fought for. If she stopped now, it would all be for nothing. With a deep breath, Lena stood her ground. "You can't scare me, Michael," she said firmly. "You may think you've won, but I'm not backing down. I will expose everything you've done, no matter what threats you make. This isn't just about business. This is about justice, and I will fight for it." Michael's smirk faded, replaced by a look of cold determination. He knew this fight wasn't over, and neither did Lena. The battle had just entered a new, more dangerous phase, and the consequences of their next moves would shape everything. Lena Maxwell stood in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection with a mix of determination and exhaustion. It had been a long road, one filled with betrayal, manipulation, and moments when it seemed like the fight was slipping away. But now, as she prepared for the final confrontation, she knew there was no turning back. This was the last chance to expose the truth and bring justice not just for herself, but for the countless individuals whose lives had been affected by the corruption that had run rampant within her company. After everything that had happened, the lost evidence, the betrayals, and the constant pressure from Michael Brooks and his network of supporters, Lena had made a decision. She wasn't going to fight this alone anymore. It was time to bring in reinforcements. She reached out to external investigators, trusted legal advisors, and even journalists who had been quietly following the company's fall from grace. It wasn't just about winning anymore, it was about bringing the entire operation to its knees. Lena knew that exposing the corruption in its entirety was the only way to break free from the grip Michael had on the company. The plan was simple: get the truth out, expose the system of fraud that had been built over years, and use the media to apply pressure. Lena was no longer playing defense. This time, she was going to make the system play by her rules. The day of the final confrontation arrived, and Lena stood in the conference room once again. This time, it wasn't just Michael and his trusted allies she would face. It was the culmination of all the forces she had gathered: the journalists, the investigators, and the legal team, each ready to bring the truth to light. She had everything she needed to expose the corruption: the documents, the testimonies, and the unwavering will to see this through. Michael, on the other hand, was prepared for battle. He had already proven how far he was willing to go to protect his empire. And Lena knew that this wasn't just a corporate dispute. It was a war over control, over integrity, and over the future of the company. As Lena walked into the room, her heart pounded in her chest. The space was filled with the usual buzz of corporate meetings. But this time, it felt different. Every person in the room knew the stakes. The weight of what was about to unfold hung in the air. Michael stood at the front, waiting for her, his confident smirk in place. But this time, Lena wasn't intimidated. She was ready. "I've got something to show you, Michael," Lena began, her voice steady and unwavering. She walked up to the table, where a stack of documents lay in front of her. The truth was finally within her reach, and she wasn't going to let him get away with it. Michael's eyes narrowed, but he didn't flinch. You think you've won? You're just digging your own grave. Lena. But Lena wasn't interested in his threats anymore. She held up a copy of the critical documents she had obtained earlier in her investigation. Documents that would prove everything: how the company's financial records had been manipulated, how the inventory had been falsified, and how Michael and his colleagues had betrayed the trust of thousands of customers. As she laid the documents out on the table, the room fell silent. She could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on her. It was her moment. The truth was about to be revealed. Just as she prepared to push forward with her evidence, something unexpected happened. Michael's expression shifted, and with a slow, deliberate motion, he slid a different set of papers across the table. You think this will change anything? He asked, his voice now colder, more calculated. These documents are irrelevant. Lena froze for a moment. She had been caught off guard, but only for an instant. Michael had anticipated her move. The papers he slid across the table contained forged documents, perfectly crafted to look like the ones she had. Her heart sank as she realized what he had done. He just flipped the script. The documents she had carefully prepared to expose his lies now seemed like they were part of his game. The public, who had been watching this confrontation unfold through the media, began to buzz with doubt. The tide was turning, and it wasn't in Lena's favor. Her credibility was now in question. What had been her most powerful weapon, the truth, had just been manipulated. And she was left holding nothing. The room filled with whispers. As Lena's mind raced, how had he managed to get the forgery into play so quickly? Had someone on her team betrayed her again? Was there another mole in her ranks? But she couldn't let this defeat her. Not now. She had come too far. And she had one last chance to turn this around. Do you really think the truth can be buried forever? Lena asked, her voice barely above a whisper, yet filled with fire. I will find a way to expose this, even if I have to burn it all to the ground. Michael looked at her with a mixture of amusement and arrogance. Go ahead, Lena, keep digging, but you should know, your investigation isn't the only thing at risk here. If you push this any further, you'll be putting everyone you love, at risk. Think about your family. The threat was clear. Michael was no longer just threatening her career, he was threatening her personal life. Her family. The realization hit hard, but Lena refused to back down. With a deep breath, Lena steadied herself. She wasn't going to let him manipulate her into backing away. The game was still on, and she wasn't going to stop until the truth came to light. No matter how many obstacles stood in her way, the fight had only just begun. And this time, Lena was ready to finish it. Lena Maxwell stood at the center of it all, facing a battle she never imagined she would be fighting. Her back was against the wall, with betrayals behind her and the stakes higher than ever. Michael Brooks had played his hand, and for a while, it had seemed like she was out of options. But Lena wasn't the kind of person who backed down. She had fought for this company for years, and no matter how hard the fight had gotten, she wasn't about to let it slip through her fingers. Her core group of allies had dwindled, but they were still standing. Jason Williams, Kate Ellis, and a few key figures who still had the courage to fight alongside her. Together, they had come up with a final, desperate plan. They had reached out to independent investigators, trusted legal teams, and journalists who had been quietly following the company's corruption story. Lena knew it wasn't just about winning anymore, it was about exposing everything for the world to see. The plan was simple: gather whatever evidence they could, make sure it was airtight, and bring the story into the public eye. If they could shine a light on the corruption, the system that Michael had created would start to crack. The truth had a way of doing that, even if it was buried under layers of manipulation and lies. It was their final shot at restoring integrity to the company, and Lena wasn't going to let it slip away. They worked around the clock, gathering documents, tracking down former employees who had left under questionable circumstances, and slowly rebuilding their case. Every new lead brought them closer to the ultimate goal, forcing Michael to face the consequences of his actions. But time was running out, and Lena knew that the final battle was fast approaching. They were getting closer to making their move when a breakthrough came. One of the journalists Lena had been working with uncovered a crucial piece of evidence that Michael had tried desperately to hide: a chain of emails that exposed his direct involvement in orchestrating the company's fraudulent activities. It was exactly what Lena needed to bring the case to the public. And it gave her the push she needed to move forward with the final confrontation. But as Lena prepared for the moment when everything would be laid bare, the ground shifted beneath her once more. A twist that she never saw coming turned everything upside down. The documents that had been gathered, the proof that was supposed to validate her claims, were tampered with. She felt her stomach drop as she realized what had happened. Someone had altered the evidence to make it look like she was the one fabricating the story. The timing couldn't have been worse, as Lena and her remaining allies scrambled to verify the authenticity of their evidence. They were blindsided by a fake information attack. The public, already on edge from months of uncertainty, began to turn against Lena. The media, once her ally, was now questioning her credibility. The team that had been with her was unraveling as fast as the documents they'd worked so hard to collect. The next few hours were a blur of confusion and panic. Lena's trusted aides were targeted. Kate Ellis was among the first to receive threats. Her home was raided by security personnel who had been secretly working for Michael's side. They made it clear that any further attempt to expose the truth would result in more than just public embarrassment. It would destroy everything Lena had worked for. And those closest to her would pay the price. Lena was furious. It wasn't just about corporate manipulation anymore, it was personal. Michael had made it clear he would stop at nothing to protect his empire. And now it was her fight against not just the corruption inside the company, but the entire system that had propped him up. The legal battles would be hard, and the media would twist every word, but Lena was determined to fight back. She and her remaining team of allies had one last chance to turn the tables. They couldn't rely on the media or the authorities anymore. They would have to use everything they had, whatever was left of the evidence, whatever remained of the public's trust, and, most importantly, their resolve. It was no longer just about exposing the corruption, it was about reclaiming control. The tension in the air was palpable as Lena gathered her team. "We need to make sure we have every angle covered," she said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "We won't win without the right strategy. But we've come this far, and I'm not letting them win." As they prepared to go public once more, Lena knew they were risking everything. The company was in the balance. Her reputation was hanging by a thread. But she also knew that if they didn't act now, Michael and his network would destroy everything in their path. They began reaching out to more insiders, trying to uncover anyone who could offer fresh evidence, someone willing to speak out despite the threats. Each step they took felt like walking on a tightrope. It was a fight for survival, and they had no guarantees. The final confrontation loomed, but as Lena reviewed the new evidence they had gathered, she realized there was one more thing they needed: a way to make sure the public saw the truth. Even if it meant sacrificing their safety and careers, it was going to take all their courage to walk into the lion's den. But Lena was ready. Her heart raced as the last piece of the puzzle fell into place. They would do whatever it took to expose the corruption and take back control. But the fight was far from over. Lena had been knocked down, but she was about to rise once again. And this time, she wouldn't be fighting alone. Lena Maxwell paced the length of the boardroom, her heels clicking against the marble floor, a sharp contrast to the silence that had settled in the room. This was the moment she had worked for, the culmination of months of planning, betrayals, and false starts. Every decision had led to this day. She could feel the weight of every eye in the room as the key players in her company, from the top executives to the major stakeholders, watched her. Her breath was steady, but inside, a storm raged. The battle was not just about winning, but about reclaiming control of everything she had lost: her company, her reputation, and her peace of mind. Lena glanced around the room, her gaze landing on Michael Brooks, who stood across from her, his usual smug expression replaced by a thin veil of unease. His attempts to cover up his wrongdoings had been met with resistance. But now, he was finally being forced into the light. With her last-ditch allies, Jason Williams, Kate Ellis, and the investigative team by her side, Lena was ready to expose the truth, no matter the cost. "The time for games is over, Michael," Lena began, her voice cutting through the tension. "The truth is coming out, whether you like it or not. And today, you'll face the consequences of what you've done." Michael remained silent for a moment, his lips curling into a thin smile as he straightened his suit. "You think you can bring me down, Lena?" he sneered, his voice cold and calculating. "You've lost already. Nothing you present today can change what's been set in motion." But Lena wasn't backing down. With a nod from her legal team, she motioned for the presentation to begin. Screens around the room flickered to life, displaying documents, emails, and financial reports that Michael had worked so hard to hide. The evidence of his manipulation was undeniable, each piece connecting the dots in a way that left no room for doubt. She had worked with the best investigators and reporters, piecing together a puzzle that had eluded them for so long. She watched as the stakeholders reacted. Some looked away, ashamed, while others seemed to be coming to terms with the enormity of what they had been part of. As the documents flashed on the screen, Michael's face grew darker, his jaw tightening. He hadn't expected Lena to come prepared with such concrete evidence, and the room could feel the shift in power. "This," Lena said, pointing to the evidence, "proves how you and your team manipulated the financials, falsified records, and kept the public in the dark. You thought you could escape this, but the truth always catches up." Michael's eyes narrowed. He had been caught in a lie, but he wasn't ready to admit defeat. "You've just scratched the surface, Lena," he replied, his tone sharp. "What you're doing here won't change the reality. You don't have the support you think you do." Lena pressed on, revealing more documents, ones that confirmed the systemic nature of the corruption. She could feel the tide shifting, but she also knew it wasn't over. Michael wasn't going to go down without a fight. As the meeting progressed, Lena could feel the stakes rising, the battle growing fiercer by the second. The media was watching, and this was no longer just an internal matter, it had become a public spectacle. Just as she thought victory was within her grasp, Michael made his move. In a shocking twist, he presented a counterclaim. Documents that appeared to discredit everything Lena had presented. They were perfect replicas of the originals, but with key alterations. The room fell into a tense silence as Michael's legal team moved swiftly to plant doubt in the minds of everyone present. Lena's heart skipped a beat. "You've forged evidence," she spat, but Michael just smiled, almost smug in his calculated brilliance. "I know how this works, Lena. You can't win without facts, and I've made sure you don't have them." The room began to murmur. Lena's worst fear had come true. Her evidence, the very thing that had given her strength, was now in question. Was this the end? Had she been outplayed once again? But Lena wasn't done yet. With a quick look at her remaining allies, she signaled them to move forward with their backup plan. Jason, who had been silent up to this point, stood and addressed the room. He spoke clearly, confidently, explaining how the documents Michael had presented were fraudulent, pointing out the inconsistencies in the dates and signatures. The real breakthrough came when Lena's investigative team produced a key witness, a former insider who had worked closely with Michael's team and could verify the authenticity of the original documents. As the witness spoke, the truth began to resurface. The momentum shifted. Michael's confident facade started to crack. His own supporters were beginning to turn. The pressure mounting. His grip on the company, once so unshakable, was now slipping away. The room, once full of whispers of doubt, was now silent, the weight of what had just been exposed pressing down on everyone. In a final desperate attempt, Michael tried to deflect, throwing accusations of his own, questioning Lena's motivations and calling her a traitor. "This isn't just about the company," he shouted. "This is about your vendetta. You've ruined everything for your own gain." But it was too late. The evidence had already spoken louder than his lies. Lena stood tall, looking directly at him. "This isn't personal, Michael. This is about justice, about doing what's right, and you will be held accountable." The battle wasn't over yet, but the tide had turned. Michael's empire was crumbling, and the truth was finally coming to light. Lena had fought long and hard to get to this point, and now, with the world watching, she had made sure that Michael could no longer hide behind lies. As the meeting ended and the media began to broadcast the results, Lena knew that this was just the beginning. The legal proceedings would follow, and Michael would face the consequences of his actions. But even as she stood there, victorious for now, Lena couldn't shake the feeling that the system of corruption was still deeply embedded in the company. The fight for real change wasn't over. The truth had been revealed, But the war for justice and reform had only just begun. The echo of the handcuffs clicking shut was the sound of a victory that Lena Maxwell had fought for months to achieve. Michael Brooks, once untouchable and the mastermind behind the financial corruption within the company, was finally being led away by authorities. His face, once full of arrogance, now showed nothing but frustration as he was escorted through the courthouse. The media, which had been following every twist and turn of the scandal, swarmed around him. The years of manipulation, deceit, and fraud were now out in the open for all to see. And Michael's reign of power had come to an end. But for Lena, the victory was bittersweet. Although she had brought Michael to justice, she knew that not all of the forces behind the corruption had been exposed. There were still others in the company, some higher up the ranks and even some who had been close to her, that had benefited from the system Michael created. They would stop at nothing to protect themselves and maintain their hold on the company. The war was far from over. While Michael's arrest was the climactic moment of Lena's fight, the consequences were far-reaching. The media storm surrounding the arrest had garnered intense public attention. However, within the company, there was an undercurrent of dissent. The employees who had long been complicit in Michael's schemes were now scrambling to save their positions. Some had already begun to plan their escape, while others took a more insidious approach. They tried to convince Lena to compromise, to allow them to keep their jobs in exchange for their silence. Even among Lena's allies, not everyone was ready to embrace the changes she wanted to implement. Jason Williams, Kate Ellis, and a few others who had stood by her side from the beginning were her strongest supporters. But as the months went on, some of the other top-level executives began to question the sweeping changes she wanted to make. These were individuals who had climbed to their positions by working within the corrupt system. And they weren't keen on seeing it dismantled. One of her most trusted advisors, Adam Carson, a veteran executive who had been with the company for over 20 years, had become increasingly vocal in his opposition. He argued that breaking down the entire structure could lead to irreparable damage to the company, potentially sending it into financial ruin. Lena, we can't just burn the house down. The company's too big, too complex. We need to rebuild, not destroy. His words, while reasonable on the surface, felt like a betrayal to Lena. She had given so much to this company, only to realize that the very people she had trusted might not be on her side when it came to true change. As the months passed, Lena found herself facing a decision that was more difficult than anything she had encountered. The fight against corruption had cost her deeply, personally, professionally, and emotionally, but she knew it wasn't over. The system that Michael had helped build was still deeply embedded within the company. Was she ready to risk everything, to take the company into a chaotic rebuilding phase? Or was it better to strike a deal with the shareholders, maintain her position, and try to move forward cautiously? The temptation to compromise was real. After all, the company's future was at stake. The market had been volatile in the wake of Michael's arrest, and there were investors who were getting nervous. Some even began to threaten pulling out their capital, creating financial instability. The reality of such a crisis weighed heavily on Lena's mind. If she pushed for radical change, there was a real risk that the company would crumble beneath the weight of its own secrets. But the thought of letting the system persist, of allowing those who had been part of the corruption to remain in power, gnawed at her. How could she live with herself if she allowed the same forces that had brought down the company to continue operating in the shadows? The anger she had felt when she first discovered the depth of the fraud still burned inside her. Michael's arrest was just the beginning of the cleanup, not the end. Lena knew she had to make a decision soon. She met with her closest allies, each one urging her to think carefully. Jason wanted her to go for broke, to fight for total reform. Kate, ever the voice of reason, advised caution, suggesting that a more measured approach would allow them to regain control without losing everything. Lena could see the weariness in their eyes. They had all given so much of themselves to this fight. But the idea of continuing it was exhausting. As Lena sat alone in her office that night, her mind raced. She thought about the people who had stood by her, the ones who had lost everything in their support of her cause. How could she let them down now? She thought about her own family, her past, and the price they had all paid for her ambition. But most of all, she thought about the company, the thousands of employees who depended on it for their livelihoods. If she pushed for radical reform, there was no guarantee the company would survive. But if she compromised, the corruption would remain. She couldn't pretend that this was just a business decision anymore. It was personal. It always had been. Lena's whole life had been intertwined with the company she had built. The decisions she made would affect not only her future but the future of everyone she cared about. As the morning sun crept through her office window, Lena made her decision. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wouldn't come without sacrifices. But she couldn't settle for anything less than complete change. She would continue the fight. For the company, for the people, and for the principles she had always believed in. The battle for the company was far from over. But Lena was ready. It was time to finish what she had started. The company's transformation was far from easy. But Lena Maxwell had finally emerged victorious. Michael Brooks, the man responsible for nearly destroying everything she had worked for, had been brought to justice. And with that, the first step toward reclaiming control had been taken. Now, standing in the midst of the company's newly revamped offices, Lena couldn't help but feel a sense of cautious optimism. She had done it. She had fought tooth and nail to expose the truth and defeat those who sought to manipulate the system for their own gain. But as she stood in the gleaming new boardroom, surrounded by her closest allies, Jason Williams, Kate Ellis, and a few trusted executives, Lena knew that the battle was far from over. The company had been shaken to its core, and the scars of the past were not easily erased. The financial corruption and deception that had once been deeply embedded within the company's infrastructure were no longer a threat. But the road to rebuilding trust and creating a new, more transparent culture was just beginning. Lena had made bold decisions to restructure the company, pushing out the corrupt elements and putting new safeguards in place to prevent future manipulation. She brought in a fresh leadership team and implemented a culture of accountability and transparency. The systems that allowed the fraud to thrive had been torn down, piece by piece, replaced with a more open and ethical structure. But change of this magnitude was never without resistance. There were still those who held power within the company, executives and partners who had thrived under the old system. These individuals did not welcome change and fought tooth and nail to maintain the status quo. Lena had expected resistance, but it still stung. As she moved through the ranks of the company, making her rounds and meeting with department heads, it became clear that not everyone was on board with her vision. There were whispers in the halls, behind closed doors, of discontent. People who once looked up to her now viewed her with suspicion, questioning her ability to lead the company forward. Lena understood that change was difficult, but she had no choice but to press on. The company could not afford to return to its former ways. One evening, after a particularly tense board meeting, Lena found herself alone in her office, staring at the glass skyline outside her window. The city stretched out before her, beautiful yet daunting. She had won, yes, but at what cost? The company had been restored, but the damage to its culture, its people, and even to herself was not something that could be fixed overnight. Some employees had already left, unable to adapt to the new regime. Others were still hesitant, their trust in the company, and in her, shattered. Lena's phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from Kate. "We've got the last of the documents we need. We're ready to finalize the new structure. But you know the real battle isn't over." Kate was right. The system had been rebuilt, but the scars of the past lingered. Lena had set the stage for a new beginning, but she couldn't help but wonder if the company would ever fully recover from the upheaval. The damage ran deep, and while she had successfully routed the corrupt elements from the top, the systems they had built over years of manipulation couldn't be dismantled with just one victory. The rebuilding process would be ongoing, and she knew it would take more than just a new leadership team to restore the company to its former glory. In the midst of this, Lena found herself at a crossroads. She had won the battle, but the war for the soul of the company was far from over. The world would continue to watch, and the challenge of leading a company through such a tumultuous period was unlike anything she had ever faced. As the weeks went on, Lena continued to face opposition from some of the older guard within the company. They resented her changes, and the power dynamics that had shifted left them scrambling for control. There was no doubt in Lena's mind that she had made the right decision by pushing for change. The company was now moving toward a more ethical, transparent future, But she also understood that change would come at a cost. Some would leave, some would resist, but eventually, the company would be stronger for it. The weight of the decision to push forward was not lost on her. As Lena walked through the hallways of the office, she felt the tension in the air. She had rebuilt, but the cracks in the foundation were still there. The journey ahead was not guaranteed, and there were still battles to be fought. As Lena walked into her office to meet with her team, she received a call. It was from the legal team. There had been a new development. A small smirk crossed her face as she listened to the news. Another twist in the story. Despite the victory, despite the reconstruction of the company, Lena knew she wasn't out of the woods yet. The fight for justice, for a company free of corruption, was ongoing. New challenges were already emerging. She wasn't just fighting to change the company, she was now fighting to change the very system that had allowed such corruption to thrive in the first place. Lena, Kate's voice crackled through the phone. We've found something new. This isn't over. Lena took a deep breath. The battle had been won, but the war was still raging, and she would fight it with everything she had, knowing that her work was far from finished. The real change, the kind that would endure, would take time. She was ready to see it through. As she looked out the window once more, a sense of resolve filled her. The company was on the right path, but there was still much work to be done. Her journey had only just begun. As we wrap up today's story, one important lesson stands out. Sometimes the truth comes from the most unexpected places. And it takes courage to face what we uncover. It's a reminder that transparency, honesty, and accountability are essential for real change. What would you do if you were in the CEO's shoes? Would you stand up for what's right, even if it meant losing everything? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing your perspectives. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you won't miss the next eye-opening story right here on Undercover Truths. Thank you for watching.